Kyle?
Good evening, everybody. I'm going to sit because I wore shorts, assuming that this elementary school wouldn't have air conditioning, so I don't want you to see my pale legs. Anyway, so who's Kyle Gorman? So I've worked for the Water Resources Department in Bend in this area since 1990. When I started, we were in a 3-year, pretty significant drought, and so I saw, up until then, probably the worst 3 years in a row until recently. So I got a good taste of, low flow conditions and how bad things can get until these last few years. But so Water Resources Department is charged with regulating, distributing water based on your water right. And I always use the word "it depends" when people ask me questions about water rights, because it always depends on where you're at and what your priority date is and all that. So the area here has some of the oldest water rights by priority date in the region. So on Mill Creek and Ochiko Creek, the water rights date back to 1868. So those are some of the oldest. So the development of irrigation in Central Oregon first occurred by individuals settling here in the Prineville Valley, and then over near Sisters next. And people passed over the Deschutes for the most part to head to the Willamette Valley, where they could grow food a little easier, grow their own gardens. In the Deschutes, however, on the Deschutes River, it took organized companies to get things moving because of the nature of the geology there and how tough it was digging irrigation canals. So the Ochiko Irrigation District, as well as other irrigation districts in Central Oregon, really got their start in the 19-teens, got their feet under them, got organized, had enough horsepower behind them to get those projects off and going. And a lot of the irrigation districts utilize what's called the CARI Act. The CARI Act was passed by Congress in 1896 or 1894 that said that if a person would put water to a piece of property, 40 or 80 acres, they could become owner of that property. So much of Central Oregon was developed under the CARI Act. So those water rights that were initiated back in the late 1800s had to be sorted out by the locals. And the state became more and more interested in a more organized and definitive way to administer water rights. Because back in the day, if you had a dispute, who would you call? We'd get the sheriff, and you'd find a judge that was favorable to you, and you'd store all the records in the county courthouse buildings, and then those records might be burnt down, and then there's no record left. So the state recognized that there's got to be a statewide organized system of water rights, and so the state adopted the water code, Oregon's water code, in 1909. So any water right that was initiated prior to 1909 is called an adjudicated water right. An adjudicated water right means that it goes through an administrative process through a judge to determine the water right, the priority date, the extent, the number of acres, how much water you can use, all those aspects. Anything after 1909 is a water right that you would apply for a permit and then a certificate. So those are a couple terms I wanted to throw out there to help folks understand. In Central Oregon, speculation and development of water rights were going rampant between 1900 and 1913. And the state engineer withdrew the Upper Deschutes from further appropriation in 1913, and they set aside some water that eventually became they called it the Deschutes Project, but it was ultimately became North Unit. In addition to the set aside, the reservation, if you will, for water for a future project, they did that on the Crooked River as well in 1914. And so they called it the Crooked River Project, and that was done by the state engineer in 1914, April 8th, 1914. So that's why Prineville Reservoir and the district's water rights date to April 8th, 1914. That's when that administrative process that said we're gonna develop a project someday here in the future. Fast forward a few decades, 1950s, Congress got together and said, well, it's time to build Prineville Reservoir. We've got flooding problems. We need to develop more irrigation, more reliable water. The Crooked River is not very reliable. As a side note, that this year, if anybody was in Prineville and was old enough to have a memory from 1960 or earlier, they will see what the Crooked River looked like prior to Prineville Reservoir being built this summer. Unfortunately, that's due to the drought. But anyway, so Prineville Reservoir was built with federal dollars. Originally, it was considered to be about 80,000 acre feet, and my former boss, who I learned pretty much everything I know about water from him, his name was Bob Main. He worked for the Ochoco Irrigation District for a number of years. He was my predecessor. Just an incredible wealth of knowledge and such a super smart person, but he was also a historian, and he looked at the records and read. He always read a lot, and he learned that the original design for Bowman Dam was 70 or 80,000 acre feet, and they thought, well, for just a little bit more money, probably less than $1 million, they could add another 70,000 acre feet and bring that capacity up to 155,000 acre feet. So the original design of Prineville Reservoir included about 70,000 acre feet of irrigation, 60,000 acre feet of flood control, and then some remaining space. And the day after the legislation was done and the reservoir was built, people said, well, what are we going to do with that remaining space in the reservoir? And myself went through 4 iterations of what to do with the allocation of Prineville Reservoir, which it finally came to be in 2013 or 14? 2014. The remaining portion of Prineville Reservoir is now authorized for fish and wildlife, in-stream purposes, mitigation water for the city of Prineville, the soon-to-be Mackay Switch, and some other uses, which are escaping me right now. But anyway, so Bowman Dam has a water right for storage. This is where it gets into complications about a stored water right versus a irrigation water right, and what's the difference. There's in the state that you can store water if you have a storage right, and then you can use that water later on, and that's actually your water to use. It is no longer public water. And so there's nuances, and that's why I always say it depends on what your water right is. So if anybody wants to come talk about their water right and how the implications of what that means, I'm happy to do that tonight. Talk a little bit about the drought. So like I said, I started in 1990. We were 3 years of drought, and then we had, I was hoping this year we'd have another 1993 scenario. I don't know if folks are around, but they remember 1993, we had 3 feet of snow all over the basin and more, and I think the flows into Prineville probably exceeded 10,000 CFS, and we had 3,000 CFS plus coming out of the reservoir, filled Prineville in about 25 days. I think it was down to 22,000 acre feet and filled and spilled in less than a month. That didn't happen this year, but we did have a nice spring, so that helped. But Prineville Reservoir started out, all the reservoirs in Central Oregon started this summer, this irrigation season, in record low levels. And Prineville especially was low. It was half, it started out this irrigation season, half of its previous low this year. So it was incredibly low and was just, it was unbelievable how little water ran off this year in the Crooked River. So be that as it may, can't really do much about the weather, but folks, Ochoco Irrigation District and others have really ramped up coordination, discussion, and some increased measurement on the Crooked River. Folks may or may not know that the state of Oregon delineated a new water master district for the Crooked River just because of the increased workload and complexities that are present now on the Crooked River. It's nothing like it used to be. When Hugh Moore was the manager of Ochoco Irrigation District, he'd go up, make a few changes each summer, make sure that there was about 30 CFS flowing below the highway bridge there, and things were good. That's about all you had to do. So it's a lot different now, like everything. It's way more complicated, way more demands on the system, and it's just completely different now. So anyway, we have a new water master. His name's Bill Nasham, and that district was carved out of the previous District 11 area. So we also probably need more folks working on the Crooked River at some point when the water right that's issued to the Bureau of Reclamation for stream flow becomes in place. I don't know if I could go on forever, so I think I should stop. Anyway, I enjoy working in water, and it's been a great career.
Thank you, Kyle. I have one question for Kyle. I had two, but I think we're going to go with one because Kyle answered the question about water rights, sort of, first in time, first in line, so to speak. The question I have for you, Kyle, is with regards to groundwater. With so many people relying on water wells here in Crook County, what's the long-term outlook for groundwater in Crook County?
Well, there's a gentleman from the USGS. So groundwater is another aspect of Water Resources Department that we do regulate. So for folks that are they have irrigation wells, you do need a water right for that. The Deschutes Basin is blessed with an abundance of groundwater. However, all that groundwater that discharges to the streams is spoken for. So there isn't any excess, but there is an abundance. So it just has to be managed properly. As you move east from Powell Butte, Prineville, and east of here, the geology changes dramatically. So the Deschutes Basin is made up of very young lava, volcanic sedimentary units, very porous, can transmit water very easily. It's not uncommon to have a well that would easily pump, you could pump 3,000 gallons a minute with no drawdown in the well in the Deschutes Aquifer. However, in Prineville in the area, we have what's called the John Day Formation and the Clarno Formation, and those are much older, much more fine grained, and water does not transmit through it, nor does water infiltrate as easily as it does in the Cascades. So that's why you have the Crooked River is much flashier. Its high flows are thousands of CFS, and its low flows are less than a CFS. So that's due to the geology here. So groundwater somewhat replicates the infiltration rates, the permeability, the ability for water to flow through the system is much more limited. The recharge is limited. We don't have as much precip here. So groundwater is much more limited in the Crook County, Prineville area. So we have to be very careful, and we need to keep monitoring our groundwater levels.